She didn't burn out because she stopped caring. She burned out because no one noticed she was bleeding while she cared. There's a quiet battle happening deep within the world of human psychology, a war that no one talks about because it happens in silence, inside the hearts of those who feel everything too deeply. This is the silent war of empaths, the ones who understand everyone, yet can't seem to rest inside their own skin. Every time someone needed her, she said yes. Every time someone hurt her, she forgave. Every time she felt empty, she called it strength. But this is not strength, it's disconnection from the self. And Carl Jung's Shadow Work reveals why. Jung wrote that, where love rules, there is no will to power. But he also warned us that when empathy becomes a persona, it hides an exhausted shadow underneath. Through the lens of Carl Jung philosophy, we begin to see the truth, that what looks like compassion is often a desperate attempt to stay needed, to avoid the terror of being unseen. In Carl Jung's Shadow Work, this is called the inflation of the caregiver archetype, one of the deepest Carl Jung archetypes that lives inside the sensitive soul. The empath gives until she becomes empty. She holds until she disappears, and the world keeps calling her selfless. But what she really is invisible. This is not just psychology, it's a crisis of inner healing. Because when empathy forgets boundaries, love turns into self-erasure. Carl Jung's Shadow Work teaches that integration begins the moment you stop trying to fix everyone else and start listening to the silence within. That silence is not loneliness. It's the doorway back to your personal growth journey. It's the place where compassion learns to breathe again, where love finally learns to include you. Asterisk, you do not become enlightened by imagining light, Jung said, but by making the darkness conscious. So, maybe the real work of the empath is not to save others, but to reclaim the parts of herself that she abandoned to stay loved. That's not weakness. That's Carl Jung's shadow work in motion, and that's how real inner healing begins. The archetype of the wounded giver. She called it empathy, but really, it was fear. Fear of what would happen if she ever stopped giving. In Carl Jung philosophy, every light has a shadow, and one of the brightest lights in human psychology is the archetype of the caregiver, the one who loves, supports, and heals. But when this archetype becomes inflated, it transforms into what Jung called the martyr, the one who saves others to avoid saving herself. It's beautiful and tragic all at once, because the empath's heart is pure. She truly wants to help, but underneath that light lives a wound, the fear that her worth depends on being needed. From a Jungian perspective, this is not weakness, it's an unconscious pattern, a survival strategy that once kept her safe. Maybe she learned as a child that being quiet and kind kept peace in the house. That love came with conditions. That caring for others was the price of being kept. And so, compassion became her armor. Empathy became her disguise. And every time she said, "I'm fine," she was performing the same ancient dance, the archetype of the wounded giver playing out again. Asterisk, the most terrifying thing, Jung wrote, is to accept oneself completely. That's why it's easier to focus on others. It feels noble, even holy. But often, it's just avoidance in disguise. Because if she slows down, if she stops tending to others for a moment, she might have to face the quiet ache that no one has ever truly tended to her. That's the real wound. Not that she gives too much, but that she doesn't know how to receive. And here's what Carl Jung's Shadow Work reveals. When you begin to see this pattern without judgment, It loses its power. You start to recognize that your empathy isn't broken. It's just tired of being used for survival. You begin to remember that compassion isn't meant to cost you yourself. True inner healing starts the moment you understand that your energy is sacred. That saying no is an act of devotion to your soul. That your love is enough, even when you're not rescuing anyone. The wounded giver archetype doesn't need to be destroyed. It needs to be integrated. When love learns to flow inward as easily as it flows out, the empath doesn't stop being kind, she just stops bleeding for it. That's when compassion becomes power, and that's the moment when she begins to feel alive again. The hidden shadow, when compassion becomes control. There's a truth that few empaths dare to admit. Sometimes compassion isn't love, it's control dressed as kindness. In human psychology, every act of care has two faces, the one that gives from freedom and the one that gives to feel safe. The second one doesn't trust love to stay unless it's earned. That's why she listens too much, forgives too soon, and carries the emotions that were never hers. She calls it empathy. Jung would call it projection. According to Carl Jung Shadow Work, the empath's light becomes distorted when she identifies so deeply with being the healer that she can't allow others to feel their own pain, because if they suffer, she suffers. If they leave, she feels empty, so she begins to manage, fix, soothe, not from compassion, but from fear of losing connection. That's not empathy, that's enmeshment. And here lies the paradox. The more she tries to protect others from pain, the more she deepens her own, because every time she steps into someone's darkness, she forgets her own boundaries of light. Carl Jung archetypes teach us that the empath carries both the healer and the savior. The first offers presence, the second tries to prove worth. Only one leads to freedom. Carl Jung philosophy reminds us, light is not destroyed by darkness, it's defined by it. So when compassion slips into control, shadow work asks only one question: who are you trying to save? When it's really yourself who needs saving, that's where inner healing begins. Not by giving more, but by giving differently. When you stop carrying everyone's emotions, you create space for truth, and truth, quietly, begins to love you back. The burnout of the soul. The body speaks the words the mouth refuses to say. At first, she just felt tired, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. But slowly, her body began to whisper louder. The headaches, the tension in her chest, the strange heaviness that came out of nowhere, they weren't random. They were messages from the soul, saying, "You've carried too much that was never yours." In human psychology, we call it compassion fatigue, but Carl Jung Shadow Work gives it a deeper name: the loss of self through over-identification. When empathy crosses into enmeshment, your nervous system begins to mirror everyone else's pain. You become a sponge for emotions that aren't your own. You don't just feel with people, you start to feel as them. And that's when love becomes exhaustion. Jung wrote that every psychic content that is not made conscious manifests in the body as fate. For the empath, fate shows up as fatigue, the body carrying what the heart won't release. Every unspoken no becomes tension. Every forced smile becomes shallow breath. Every swallowed truth becomes insomnia. The body becomes the diary of unexpressed boundaries. The tragedy is, she doesn't even notice, because the world praises her for being selfless. They call her kind, strong, a healer. But strength without awareness is just slow collapse. Carl Jung philosophy teaches that when the soul is ignored, it doesn't disappear. It moves deeper, waiting beneath the surface for acknowledgement. And when it's been waiting too long, it speaks through the only medium left, the body. That's why the empath's healing must start from the inside out, not the outside in. No affirmation, no routine, no to-do list can fix what's fundamentally about energy. You can't rest your way out of depletion until you reclaim what's yours from everyone else. So she begins to notice her body tightening when someone oversteps, her breath shallow when she agrees to what she doesn't want, her heartbeat softening when she finally says no. This is Carl Jung, shadow work in motion, not theory, but physiology. It's the soul teaching the body to remember peace again. When she stops seeing exhaustion as weakness and starts seeing it as communication, everything shifts. Her burnout is not betrayal, it's a compass. It points to where her energy is still serving a story that no longer belongs to her. And every time she listens, her body thanks her. By breathing a little easier, there is no coming to consciousness without pain, Jung said. But the pain is not punishment, it is birth. The empath's burnout isn't an ending, it's the first contraction of awakening. And when she finally stops fighting her fatigue, she discovers what real strength feels like, the kind that doesn't require her to suffer to prove it. The power of withdrawal. When the empath finally steps back, the world mistakes it for distance. But it's not distance, it's detox. She's not disappearing, she's deconditioning from noise, from expectation, from over-responsibility. Jung once said that the soul needs its secret garden, and that's what withdrawal is, the garden of the self. At first, the silence feels unbearable. No one to check on, no one to save, no one to mirror back her worth. But then, something miraculous happens. The quiet begins to breathe, without everyone else's emotions echoing in her mind. She starts to hear her own. She notices the small voice she'd silenced for years. What do you need? What do you feel? Simple questions. But to the empath, they feel revolutionary. Carl Jung philosophy teaches that withdrawal isn't escape, it's integration. It's when the psyche collects all the scattered pieces and starts to weave them back together. Through Carl Jung's shadow work, she learns that solitude isn't loneliness. It's meeting herself without distraction, because healing isn't found in noise. It's found in noticing the space between reaction and response, the place where choice lives. She begins to walk slower, eat slower, feel slower. She starts to trust time again. That's how empaths recover, not by building walls, but by reclaiming rhythm. Her nervous system, once stretched thin, begins to hum at a gentler frequency. Her body remembers stillness. Her mind stops racing toward other people's storms. And that's when the magic happens. Her empathy doesn't fade. It becomes cleaner, quieter, stronger. Now, when someone cries, she doesn't drown with them. She becomes the calm water that helps them see their reflection. That's what withdrawal is for. Not to leave, but to remember your depth. The return to boundaries. When she returns, she's no longer the same woman who left. Before, she loved to be needed. Now, she needs to be true. Boundaries used to scare her. They felt like rejection. But now she understands. Boundaries are bridges built from honesty. They don't push people away. They show them where love can meet without harm. Carl Jung Shadow Work calls this individuation the sacred act of drawing your energy inward so that connection can become conscious again. Because love without boundaries isn't intimacy, it's fusion. And fusion always ends in fatigue. In human psychology, This is emotional differentiation, the capacity to hold another's feelings without losing yourself inside them. For the empath, this is mastery. She can still listen deeply, but now she doesn't absorb. She feels with, not as. Every no, she says, is a yes to her own peace, and every pause before reacting is a small moment of sovereignty. This is what Carl Jung philosophy means when it says wholeness includes opposites. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors with sacred locks. Only those who knock with respect can enter. Now her energy feels cleaner, her relationships feel lighter, her love feels truer. Because when you love from wholeness, you don't lose yourself. You meet yourself through others. That's the highest form of empathy, the one that doesn't rescue, but recognizes. The peace that remains. Out of chaos, stars are born. Out of exhaustion, clarity arrives. Now the silence doesn't scare her anymore. It soothes her. She no longer waits to be seen. She sees herself. She no longer fears saying no. She trusts that love will stay. She no longer tries to fix anyone. She sits beside them, letting presence do the work words never could. This is what Carl Jung's shadow work was always leading her to. Not perfection, but presence. Not constant doing, but conscious being. She's no longer just an empath. She's a soul aware of its boundaries, its rhythms, its belonging. Jung called this individuation, the sacred process of becoming whole while remaining human. It's when the self stops seeking rescue and begins radiating quiet confidence. Her empathy hasn't vanished, it's evolved. It no longer bleeds, it breathes. It no longer rescues, it recognizes. And through that recognition, she feels something she hasn't felt in years. Peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's calm. That peace is her true essence. It was never lost. It was simply waiting beneath all the noise of kindness. Now, when she gives, it's not to be loved. It's because she already is. That's the quiet end of the silent war. Not victory, not defeat, just awareness. Asterisk, the privilege of a lifetime, Jung said, is to become who you truly are. And that's who she is now, an empath who has come home to herself. If this message found you today, maybe it's because your soul needed a reminder that empathy was never your weakness. It was just waiting to become wisdom. If something in this journey spoke to you, pause for a moment, take a breath, and tell us in the comments which part of the silent war felt like your story. Your words might be the mirror. Another empath needs to finally recognize herself. If you're walking this same path of healing and self-rediscovery, subscribe to Inner Balance Psychology. Every week, we dive deeper into Carl Jung's shadow work, feminine archetypes, and the human psychology of healing. Because this channel isn't just about learning, it's about remembering. And if this episode touched something in you, share it with someone who's always giving too much. Sometimes, one video can be the pause that brings a soul back home. You were never meant to disappear to make others feel whole. You were meant to remember your own light.